Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching Gravitas. Tonight, we discuss about India's immediate neighborhood, which is increasingly riven by terrorism and its implications for you. Now, terror, quite literally, is at India's doorstep. Even as India battles terrorist groups on its western borders with Pakistan, comes the news of a pitched battle on its eastern frontier between Bangladeshi security forces and terrorists holed up inside a building at Sylhet, close to Meghalaya and Tripura in India's northeast. Now, Bangladesh, like India, is not immune to terrorism. The 1st July 2016 terrorist attack at a cafe in Dhaka was a watershed in Bangladesh's history. Since then, many attacks have rocked Bangladesh. Just last week, 2 suicide bombings took place in Dhaka, including one near the international airport. Now, the Islamic State claimed responsibility for both the attacks. Terrorist groups such as the Jamaat al-Mujahideen Bangladesh or JMB and the Harkatul Jihad al-Islami or HUJI pose a threat not only for Bangladesh but India as well. Now, joining me to discuss this and related issues is security analyst Shantanu Mukherjee, who has closely tracked the goings-on in Bangladesh for some time now. And from Dhaka, Shafkat Munir, another security analyst who joins us via Skype. I'll also have WION's Bangladesh Bureau Chief Saad Hamadi with us from Sylhet, where the Operation Twilight has been on for 3 days now. Thank you, gentlemen, for making time to be on Gravitas tonight. All right, but first I want to play for you a report that will piece together all that has happened so far. Take a look.
Brigadier General Fakrul Hassan has just briefed the media saying they've killed 2 terrorists holed up inside the building. There might be 1 or more terrorists still there. The operation will continue and they have not been able to say when this operation can end. They're apprehending that the building is still planted with improvised explosive devices, and which is why they are taking all the cautions to make sure that there is no further casualty or damage within the neighborhood. They're saying that the terrorists are heavily trained with arms and ammunition as well as explosives they have in their possession. The training has been apparent to the army commandos when they have tried to hurl gas canisters. They've seen them being diffused by lighting up fire, which is training that is not usually available to common militants and individuals, and that goes to show that this operation has taken quite some time. Almost it has run into 3 days, and it's going for a further day or more. This is Saad Hamadi for WION in Sylhet.
All right, let's go straight to our guest. Mr. Mukherjee, I want to begin by asking you now, all this is happening right at India's doorstep. Shouldn't India be worried? Would you be worried?
Of course, India needs to be worried, and India is worried by all calculations. And so am I. As a Bangladesh watcher, as a citizen of India, it's right at the doorstep, very close to Assam, Sylhet, etc. And the fallout, the spillover, is very likely, joining hands with the jihadis who are sheltered in India. So it's really a matter of concern. Yes.
Indeed. And if I were to ask you about the lapses, for instance, and let's think in terms of solutions, what would your advice be, or your immediate take on what is happening in Sylhet, even as we speak?
Well, you began your address by starting from the July 1st, the attack in the cafe, and followed by a string of attacks elsewhere over this period. Now, why is it happening periodically? It's all right that the counter-terror architecture there in Bangladesh is able to meet the challenges, like in Sylhet, it is the 3rd day,
right.
But to ensure that the casualties are minimum, 2 terrorists are reported to have been killed so far, and many may be lying dead inside. That is all right. But why is it happening? So I would say, as an analyst, it is the intelligence factor which is on the decline. Bangladesh does not have a very foolproof intelligence system. What is lacking is there is no penetration inside the JMB cadres, which is growing more muscular and growing strength to strength as the days go by.
Right.
But they have not been able to infiltrate and cause any damage, so they continue to inflict injuries on the Bangladesh.
Fair enough. If I can bring in Mr. Munir now. Mr. Munir, there we heard Mr. Mukherjee say, talk about the lapses, as it were, be it intelligence or otherwise. Now, in your estimation, whose footprint do you see in these Sylhet attacks? Is it homegrown indigenous groups, or is it an Islamic State proxy or inspired by the Islamic State? Mr. Munir?
I think the jury is still out on which group might be actually holed up in Sylhet, because the information that we have is quite scant. But from what we have seen and heard so far, it appears that it is likely to be a cell of the Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh. Whether or not there are also self-radicalized individuals in that hideout is still something that remains to be seen. But as your bureau chief in Dhaka also reported from Sylhet and mentioned in his report, the militants who are holed up in their hideout seem to be very well prepared, well equipped, and the operation has now dragged on for 72 hours, which is quite a long time. And so we really need to see what's actually, once the operation ends, what kind of equipment, what kind of material, and what kind of technical know-how those militants had.
Indeed, Mr. Munir, I want to ask you the same question which I posed to Mr. Mukherjee in my studio here. In your estimation, now it might be premature for us to discuss this, but still, nevertheless, what do you think might be the lapses in the Sylhet case, for instance? And in terms of solution, where do you think Bangladesh might be lacking, or which needs to be done going forward?
I think Mr. Mukherjee rightly pointed out that we have to revamp our intelligence estimation of these groups. We have to find out how their structures have evolved. As Saad Hamadi also mentioned, some tactical innovations were at display during the raid today. So we have to make a fresh threat assessment, and we also have to come up with a comprehensive strategy on how we want to counter these groups, not just Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh, but all the other jihadist outfits operating out of Bangladesh.
Indeed. Mr. Mukherjee, now, India has Pakistan for a neighbor, which uses terrorism as an instrument of state policy. And in the east, on the eastern frontier, we have Bangladesh, which is battling terrorist groups, which draw sustenance from countries, including Pakistan. Now, what can and must India do?
Well, India should cooperate with Bangladesh in combating the extraneous forces which is trying to destabilize and subvert and foment terror. First and foremost is Pakistan.
Okay.
I would place on record here, Pakistan High Commission in Dhaka has been rather proactive for the last over 1 year. And there is statistics also. There have been a number of Pakistani diplomats acting undercover as spies or operatives of ISI, has been responsible for funding, for giving material, and abetting terror there.
Right.
So that needs to be curbed and arrested, for which India's technical know-how and intelligence expertise should come very handy.
Fair enough. And Mr. Munir, the Sheikh Hasina government seems to be doing more than any other government in Bangladesh in the recent past when it comes to taking insurgent groups head-on, including those which operate or use their influence in India's northeastern states. But in your estimation, is it succeeding in combating terrorist groups such as the Huji or the JMB?
For any government, including this government, the challenge of violent extremism is a very significant one.
Right.
I think the security forces in Bangladesh have been very adroit in their efforts in countering these groups. But I would go back to what I had said earlier. There are tactical evolutions, the group structures are changing. There is the element of cyber radicalization, which are all acting as force multipliers in the case of this group. So we are engaged in an uphill task, and it will take time, but I'm hopeful that we will succeed.
All right, Mr. Munir, I want to pose that same question to Saad, who is in Sylhet. Now, coming to you, Saad, if you can hear me, over the years, Bangladesh has been hit by terror attacks. Is Bangladesh doing enough to combat groups such as JMB or Huji?
We can assume that the security forces have not ruled out the possibility of further terror attacks since the July cafe attack last year, and which is also one of the reasons we've seen the counter-terrorist and transnational crime unit and police carrying out operations in various parts of the country and arresting some of the key members of terrorist outfits such as Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh. They've also taken out Tamim Chaudhry, who's a key member of the Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh, according to the government, who's also prominently featured as the emir of the Islamic State in Bangladesh. Also, having said that, the police have also taken into consideration that the nature and style of the attacks by terrorist outfits have changed. Previously, they have targeted individuals, and now they're going after mass casualties. This particular incident in Sylhet, where I'm reporting from, is also an example of the kind of hostage situation that can arise as a result of their preparations and training. The army has said that the terrorists who are inside this building hold up right now were highly trained. They're still there, some of them. There could be one or more terrorists inside the building. But having said that, the lesson that has been taken by the security forces should be noted that they have carried out some preemptive measures to thwart some major terrorist attacks that could have taken place otherwise.
Also, Saad, do you think any lessons have at all been learned after the July 2016 Dhaka cafe attack?
Well, the security forces have carried out preemptive operations in the last 8 months to various militant dens and hideouts, and they have recovered a huge stash of explosives and arms and ammunitions that these terrorists have possessed, as well as they have arrested a number of terrorists in the time. They have also killed a number of suspected terrorists, including the terrorist JMB outfit's leader, Tamim Chaudhry, who is also said to be the emir of Islamic State for Bangladesh. So that goes to show that the government and the authorities have been doing a pretty good job in carrying out these operations. But as security analysts point out, that there may be terrorist groups and sleeper cells active in the country, and the result of which we are seeing only recently over the last weeks when these suicide bomb attacks, as well as this building that has been put into danger with improvised explosive devices. That goes to show that there is an intense situation in the country as far as these terrorist outfits are concerned. But having said that, the army and the security forces in the country have been very active to carry out operations across the country to neutralize as well as take these terrorists into book. There have not been too many terrorist attacks that have been carried out in the last 8 months. Only recently, that in the last week, that we have been seeing this kind of attacks taking place. Also to note is that this particular building that the operation is currently going on was also a preemptive effort where the police have found out on a tip-off that the Mainul Musa, one of the key coordinators of Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh, may be hiding inside, and based on those information, they have carried out this operation. And while in the process of running this operation, they have learned that this building might be planted with improvised explosive devices, which can be dangerous for the civilians staying in the building. And they have also learned that there could be possession of such arms and ammunitions, which could be dangerous and not just possible for the regular security forces such as the police and counter-terrorist unit to operate, and which is why the government has brought in the army to carry out this operation. And in the process, they have already killed 2 terrorists in the building. They're suspecting that there might be 1 or more terrorists still in the building, and they're hoping that this operation will be successful, but they're going very slow. They have been trying to persuade the terrorists that are inside this building, that are holed up inside the building, to persuade them to surrender and come out alive, but that has not been possible, and which is as a result, we are seeing that 2 terrorists have been killed today. The army has gone on a full-scale assault operation by launching the rocket launchers and drilling inside the building to shake these terrorists, to understand their strength. And the army is saying that these terrorists have been pretty well equipped and also trained to defuse gas canisters and other such mechanisms and techniques that army and commando forces apply to in such kind of a crisis situation.
Right. All right. Thank you, Saad, for sharing your thoughts with me on Gravitas tonight. Thank you for your inputs. Appreciate it. And please stay safe. Now, coming back to you, Mr. Mukherjee, how serious or vulnerable do you think South Asia is to the spread of the so-called Islamic State? Now, we know the Islamic State is on the retreat in Iraq and Syria, and US President Donald Trump has spoken about a fight to the finish. But the Islamic State's ideology remains as virulent as ever. So your thoughts?
Well, the implications are very profound. Number one, there has not been any serious attempt, which is visible, to stop the radicalization. ISIS footprint is there, and they continue to send messages from Syria through their magazines and social media, and the youth continue to be radicalized. That needs to be contained to arrest its spread in the South Asia. Number two, the West is claiming, whether Trump, as you mentioned, that the war is going to finish against ISIS. Now, all those cadres from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Indonesia, or some from India perhaps, who are fighting there in Mosul, Tikrit, etc., which are falling gradually, they will eventually come back. So they are battle-hardened cadres, highly radicalized. When they come, how do they vitiate the rest of the cadres needs to be watched for. So immediate fallout is that. And then again, I would go back to my same forte of intelligence that needs to be geared up to see what are they up to.
Fair enough. Coming to you, Mr. Munir, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina will visit India in a few weeks' time. Now, in your estimation, what can India and Bangladesh together do to overcome this problem?
I think India and Bangladesh already have a robust cooperation for counterterrorism. And in the upcoming visit by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, counterterrorism will be a major part of the discussion between the two prime ministers and the bilateral talks between the two countries. We can perhaps evaluate on where we can enhance or strengthen our existing counterterrorism cooperation mechanisms. Since there is a cross-border element to some of these groups, there is the fear that, as Mr. Mukherjee also said, that unless the groups are properly contained in India, they could pose a security risk to bordering Indian states as well. We need to see how we can perhaps enhance our border management coordination mechanisms in this regard, and also increase our information sharing specifically related to counterterrorism or countering violent extremism. I think these are some of the things that we need to look at. Also, I think India and Bangladesh can have a conversation about the potential rise of Islamist militancy in the Rakhine region of Myanmar, a country which borders both India and Bangladesh, and see like what is the current state of play there, and perhaps if these two countries can work together in finding a solution to the problem with the Rohingyas.
Right. I want to take a moment or two to talk about a bit about a recent report which Bangladesh government shared with India. Now, this report was shared by the Bangladesh Home Ministry, and recently the Bangladeshi government warned the Indian Home Ministry that around 2,000 Harkatul Jihad al-Islami or Huji and Jamaat al-Mujahideen Bangladesh or JMB operatives entered West Bengal, Assam and Tripura. Now, the report has raised alarms in India, especially because the NIA, or the National Investigation Agency, has discovered the JMB hand in the 2014 Bardwan blast in West Bengal. Around 720 terrorists entered through the porous border in Bengal, while the remaining entered through riverine areas in Tripura and Assam. The report also says that JMB Secretary Sajjad Hussain, alias Iftadur Rahman, entered India on January 12 on a fake passport and met other jihadis in Bengal and Assam. At the same time, a meeting between Huji and JMB leaders and the connections in Bengal, Assam and Delhi was held on January 18 in Mymensingh district of Bangladesh. Now, the JMB was responsible for the Holy Artisan Bakery attack in Dhaka last year and is inclined to the Islamic State. Now, coming to Mr. Mukherjee, the Interior Minister Rajnath Singh in India has spoken about border management and sealing the borders, as it were, on the western frontier with Pakistan and on the eastern frontier with Bangladesh. Now, the idea behind it is to not only combat or overcome terrorism, but also combat the problem of illegal movement or migration between countries. Now, how do you see this development on the part of Indian government to mobilize or to sort of seal the borders, as it were?
Well, it's a huge border, 4,000 kilometers plus, and maximum being in West Bengal and Assam. So if it had come from the helm, that is from the Home Minister, so I hope the border guard forces take it very seriously, and if it is not sealed hermetically, at least the vigil should be stepped up.
Is it a practical solution in your estimation?
It's
is it
not
effective?
not totally practical.
Is it foolproof?
Yeah, no, it has to be seen, not in immediate future. it does not seem very feasible because it's a huge border. We
Right.
need, the numericals has to be very high, the equipment, the wherewithal. It's not. But the idea is good, we should take it forward. But what you just told me, that is where I would say, why no preventive measures were taken?
Absolutely.
You are quoting specific dates.
Right.
By the fake passports, everything. How are they known? If they were known, they came on January 12th or July 12th. Why weren't they stopped there and action taken? What you are saying is a fait accompli. It had already taken place. Nothing. The intelligence is all about preempting it.
Absolutely.
And like my friend Mr. Munir and Saad had been saying, given a situation to Bangladesh to deal with the terror situation, it's very commendable and exemplary. They are just dealing with it. But to preempt it, prevent it, that becomes very important.
Fair point. If I can bring back Mr. Munir into the discussion. Now, Mr. Munir, in your estimation, does Bangladesh have a counter-terrorism policy or doctrine? I mean, the standard operating procedures, SOPs, or the wherewithal in terms of men and material to take on the terrorist groups?
Bangladesh does have the SOPs and an overall counterterrorism policy. Over the years, Bangladesh has raised and trained many different specialized units within the police and the armed forces to deal specifically with counterterrorism operations. We heard earlier about the counterterrorism and transnational crime unit of the Bangladesh police.
Right.
The Rapid Action Battalion, there is the Army Special Forces. I want to tell you that Bangladesh is a country which has taken counterterrorism very seriously for a fair amount of time. But obviously there is an opportunity for Bangladesh to look at creating an overarching comprehensive counterterrorism strategy, spend more emphasis on counter-radicalization and de-radicalization policies, and recognize and deal with the fact that we are dealing with a very new kind of threat. I have been working on JMB for over a decade now,
Right.
but the kind of JMB we have right now, the kind of operations that we see by JMB and other groups right now is a far cry from the group that we saw in the mid-2000s. Mr. Mukherjee would also be able to attest to that how much the group has changed over the years. The nature of international terrorism has also changed over the years. There is this whole aspect of cyber or online radicalization, or the use of the internet not only for communications radicalization, but also gaining technical know-how. So I think that there is an opportunity for us. We have already done a lot, but there is an opportunity for us to take it a step further and see how we can hone our skills further and come up with a more enhanced strategy.
Right, Mr. Munir, and before I come back to Mr. Mukherjee in the studio, I want to quickly play out for you, for the benefit of you, the viewer, another graphic which might give you a better idea of what the JMB is all about. Take a look. Right, so if I can continue the discussion, meanwhile, Mr. Mukherjee, India has a tendency to cherry-pick leaders in countries in its neighborhood. It sees Sheikh Hasina as someone it can do business with as compared to, say, a Khalida Zia. Do you think is that a wise policy? Because someday, sooner than later, Khalida Zia will come back to power, whether we like it or not. Shouldn't India be reaching out to all parties cutting across political lines in Bangladesh? Why should you only cherry-pick a particular leader or a party? You think it's a wise decision?
Well, that's more a political question than a security-related one. But if I may answer that as a geopolitical strategist or a thinker, it's premature to cultivate now because Begum Khalida Zia.
In fact, my contention is with the word cultivate. I mean, shouldn't India be reaching out to all political parties, not only in Bangladesh, but other countries in our neighborhood? Because the problem is the moment you identify yourself with a political party, the other political parties automatically range against them.
Definitely. But at this point of time, I would not see that India should cultivate or befriend forces like Khalida Zia, because they had partnered with Jamaat-e-Islami in the past on 2 occasions. And Jamaat-e-Islami had 2 cabinet rank ministers there. And during their long spell, while in government, they had nurtured all the grassroots cadres, including of JMB and Huji. So they flourished, they prospered, they continue to receive funds from Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries, and they prospered. So it's now, so this is now we should definitely cultivate and strengthen Hasina, because she is the one who has demonstrated with results, getting rid of the militants who were harbored in a country, who were anti-India, and continue to pursue a policy with high degree of professionalism by the anti-terror forces there in Bangladesh to get rid of the militants.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to take that same question across to Mr. Munir. Mr. Munir, there we heard Mr. Mukherjee share his thoughts on whether India or how should India approach the two rival political parties, the Awami League and the BNP. Now, in your estimation, how do you agree with India's policy of aligning itself with a political party in Bangladesh as opposed to the others?
I will only refer back to Prime Minister Modi's statement when he had visited Bangladesh in 2015, that India believes in full spectrum political engagement with all sides in Bangladesh.
Right.
I think in order to have a sound policy vis-a-vis Bangladesh, obviously there needs to be full and comprehensive cooperation with the government of the day, but it is also important to have full spectrum political engagement, a point which the Prime Minister of India himself has underscored.
Absolutely. And Mr. Munir, so what needs to be done in your estimation going forward to tackle these issues that we discussed in the last few minutes or so?
I think there is a very significant challenge ahead of Bangladesh right now. We have had a number of attacks in the past few days. As we speak, a major counterterrorism operation is ongoing.
Right.
As Saad Ahmadi also mentioned, more attacks cannot be ruled out in the immediate future. So I think counter-terrorism and violent extremism has emerged as a significant national security challenge for Bangladesh, and it has ramifications not just for Bangladesh but for the wider region. So domestically, Bangladesh needs to have a fresh look at its strategies, its SOPs, its policies, and at the same time also see how we can counter these groups more effectively, how their structures have changed and what needs to be done.
Right.
Internationally or regionally, we need to enhance regional and international cooperation, both bilateral and multilateral. And at the end of the day, we have to recognize it is a long war that we're all engaged in. India is engaged in, Bangladesh is engaged in. And we must fight together, because if we don't communicate and if we don't collaborate amongst each other, it only favors the terrorists.
Absolutely. And Mr. Mukherjee, taking off from where Mr. Munir left, politically, security-wise, what do you think India and Bangladesh should be doing in the weeks and months ahead to combat incidents such as these that's happening in Sylhet today?
Well, like Mr. Munir just now indicated, that our intelligence cooperation must be strengthened.
Right.
Hard-time intelligence must be shared. I'm sure India must be more privy to receiving intelligence, and actionable intelligence beforehand should be shared with Bangladesh. And whatever expertise India has must be lent. I'm sure it is being done now as we speak to Bangladesh. And this joint cooperation, like Mr. Munir said, that unless we collaborate amongst ourselves, we cannot achieve. So it has to be more visible and more robust to achieve some results.
So your prognosis or diagnosis would be to have a robust intelligence cooperation?
Yes.
And on the political side as well, I mean, between
political
two governments,
side,
especially in the light of
also,
Prime Minister's visit?
But now, yes, Prime Ministers, but like you said, that befriending the other parties so that we don't keep all eggs in one basket, that is what perhaps you implied, is that it is not time now, or if at all it is done, it should not be very visible. It has to be very discreet, because we should not be alienating Hasina. She is a proven friend of ours, has to be cultivated, and her visit is more than due in early next month. So we should not upset anything. It's
indeed,
a very delicate matter.
Indeed. If I can just quickly go across to Mr. Munir. Mr. Munir, after the July 2016 attack at the cafe in Dhaka, we saw most recently an audacious attack by the terrorists on the RAB headquarters. Now, what do you make of this new approach, or this new militant or more assertive and aggressive approach on the part of the terrorists in Bangladesh?
I think what particularly concerns me is the fact that they're using suicide tactics now. At least in a couple of attacks, that seems to have been the case.
Right.
So there is a renewed level of radicalization that is definitely in display. We need to see where these cadres are coming from, how they're being motivated in this manner, what kind of material is being used.
Right.
There was a debate after the Holy Bakery attacks that radicalization is perhaps more prevalent now among the urban youth than the youth in the rural areas.
Indeed.
We need to sort of revisit that notion. And we also need to see what kind of financing is happening to some of these groups. How are the finances being raised? What sort of channels are being used? We also need to do a comparative study with the explosives that are being used now as opposed to the explosives that were used 5 years or 10 years earlier.
Right.
See what kind of qualitative changes have taken place. We all see that the threat has morphed into a more lethal, more powerful, and a more networked one. It's a more cellular threat. There are more sleeper cells dispersed across the country. We saw a big operation in Chittagong. Now, as we speak, there's a big operation in Sylhet, 2 major metropolitan centers of Bangladesh outside Dhaka. So we have to look at all these things, but it is abundantly clear to all of us in Bangladesh that the groups have come back with more gusto, with more prowess, and we need to brace ourselves and counter them with more of an expeditious as well as in a very well-calibrated and powerful manner.
Right. And Mr. Munir, I want to quickly touch upon one issue which I had raised with Mr. Mukherjee here in the studio a short while ago, and that has to do with Bangladesh's strident position or opposition to all the links between Pakistan and the various terrorist groups that are obtaining in South Asia, especially in Bangladesh. Now, we've seen and heard Prime Minister Hasina take a strong position vis-a-vis Pakistan on the issue of the SAARC summit. Now, going forward, you think it is time that countries in the region, including India and Bangladesh, join hands to target the crux of the issue, and that is the Pakistan or the terrorism which is emanating from Pakistan, especially that's targeted at both Bangladesh and India?
Any country that sponsors terrorism or supports terrorism in any form or manifestation should be condemned. And Bangladesh and India have an opportunity to bilaterally and also multilaterally, under the rubric of SAARC, to ensure that no country in the region or further afield has an opportunity to sponsor or support terrorism. I think all countries need to take a common stand, India and Bangladesh in particular, that terrorism and violent extremism is a scourge upon our societies. It is halting the economic growth and the economic potential that all of our countries have, and we must fight with everything in our disposal to counter this threat.
Indeed, Mr. Munir, I want to ask you a categorical question. In your estimation, Mr. Munir, is Pakistan a fit case for being declared a terrorist state?
I think it would be premature to comment on that, whether Pakistan can be declared a terrorist state or not. Obviously, there have been significant allegations against Pakistan of supporting or abetting terrorist acts, and whether it is in the case of India or it is in the case of other countries. But and we need to make sure, whether it is Pakistan or any other country, that if any country engages in supporting terrorism, there will be a cost to pay.
All right. If I can take the same question to you, Mr. Mukherjee. Mr. Munir seems to be non-committal on that issue. Is Pakistan, in your estimation, a fit case to be declared a terrorist state? Should it be at all be given the benefit of the doubt anymore?
I think not immediately. Let us watch the situation. If they step up or intensify their activities in Bangladesh or in India for some time, then perhaps a concerted action should be taken. And our mandarins in the External Affairs Ministry and the government are well aware of it. And I'm sure at the right opportune time, they will take the decision.
All right. If I can just ask you, gentlemen, for your concluding thoughts, Mr. Munir. So, in your estimation, going forward, what needs to be done in the immediate aftermath of the Sylhet attack, which Bangladesh can do on its own and also in association or collaboration with India? Your concluding thoughts, Mr. Munir.
We need to do a serious stock take on the lessons learned from the Sylhet attack, take a fresh look at the group, take a fresh look at all the groups, including the team, and see what needs to be done. See some of the pitfalls of our strategies and tactics that have been used and see how we can make them better. And bilaterally, we need to see how the counter-terrorism aspect of Indo-Bangladesh relations can be enhanced further and what can be done about it.
Fair enough. And Mr. Mukherjee, your concluding thoughts, what needs to be done going forward, especially in light of Prime Minister Hasina's visit to India next month?
Well, she should carry a concrete agenda, specifically what to seek from India in intelligence cooperation and to seek assistance to strengthen the anti-terror structure in this thing, in Bangladesh. She should come out with that. On part of Bangladesh, I would recommend, it looks a little primitive, but in the intelligence tradecraft, it seems imperative, is to infiltrate into the cadres. They have a strength of 10,000, the last statistics, to trace and start marginalizing or neutralizing the cadres.
Is there anything India can and should do unilaterally without waiting for reciprocity in combating terrorism, especially inside Bangladesh?
No, here the question of reciprocity does not arise.
Okay.
Like if you're meaning quid pro quo.
Right.
It is unilaterally, it can continue to offer hard intelligence.
Or if I can rephrase my question, without any strings attached.
No strings
India
attached.
would be willing to share with Bangladesh's counter-terrorism prowess over the years.
Definitely. I can safely assume, given the professionalism of India and the growing nexus between the two countries to counter terror, addressing the joint problem, India should unilaterally continue to provide intelligence and all the expertise to them, whether it is a technical know-how, whether it is of, something, say, snooping or all the
actionable intelligence as well.
Yes, of course, actionable. Absolutely. If India comes to know that this is going to happen, then you said you do this, more an advisory, a prescriptive role on part of India.
All right, absolutely. One fascinating discussion on, but unfortunately we're running out of time. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Munir in Dhaka, and also Mr. Mukherjee here in the studio here for a fascinating discussion on Gravitas.